The crimson sunset cast long shadows across Virginia City, Nevada, as Francesca Wells clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders. The year was 1876, and the once booming silver mining town still attracted fortune seekers, despite the waning ore veins beneath the dusty streets. Francesca had not come for silver, but rather to escape the suffocating confines of her former life in Boston, a life that had crumbled when her father's investment firm collapsed under the weight of scandal. Last stop, Virginia City. The stagecoach driver called out, his voice rough from years of shouting over thundering hoofbeats and creaking wood. Francesca descended from the coach, her legs stiff after days of travel. At 22, she had never ventured west of the Mississippi, and certainly never imagined she would be standing alone in a frontier town with nothing but 2 valises and a teaching certificate to her name. She had secured a position at the town school through correspondence with the mayor, who had been surprisingly eager to hire an educated woman from the East. Miss Wells, a round-faced woman, approached, her cheeks flushed from exertion. "I'm Mrs. Hannigan, wife of the mayor. You must be exhausted after your journey." "Indeed, though mostly relieved to have arrived," Francesca replied, offering a tired smile. Mrs. Hannigan led Francesca to a modest boarding house on C Street, explaining that it was owned by a respectable widow and housed several single women. "The school term begins in 2 weeks' time. That should give you ample opportunity to settle in and familiarize yourself with our little community." Little was hardly the word Francesca would have chosen. Virginia City sprawled across the mountainside, its wooden buildings climbing up and down the slopes in seeming defiance of gravity. The air smelled of dust, smoke, and something metallic, the scent of the mines that had built this place. Over the following days, Francesca explored her new home, carefully noting landmarks to avoid getting lost. The town boasted several grand structures: the Territorial Enterprise newspaper office, the Fourth Ward School, the International Hotel, alongside ramshackle saloons and gambling halls. It was a stark contrast to Boston's orderly streets, but Francesca found herself oddly enchanted by the raw energy of the place. 1 week after her arrival, Francesca decided to venture beyond the town limits, seeking relief from the constant noise and bustle. Following a winding path, she discovered a peaceful spot along the Carson River, where cottonwood trees provided welcome shade. She settled on a flat rock with her journal, intending to write letters to the few friends she had left back east. Lost in thought, Francesca didn't notice the gathering clouds until the first fat raindrops splattered against her paper. She quickly gathered her belongings, but the gentle shower rapidly transformed into a downpour. The path back to town became slippery with mud, and as Francesca hurried along the riverbank, her foot caught on an exposed root. The world tilted. She pitched forward, arms windmilling desperately, and then plunged headlong into the swollen river. The shock of the cold water stole her breath. Her heavy skirts immediately became waterlogged, dragging her beneath the surface. Francesca thrashed wildly, managing to break through long enough to gasp for air before sinking once more. The current seized her, tumbling her body like a rag doll as she was swept downstream. In her panic, she didn't see the rider who had spotted her from the trail above. She didn't hear the thundering hoofbeats or the splash as man and horse entered the water. All she knew was the burning in her lungs and the terrifying certainty that she was drowning. Then strong arms encircled her waist, pulling her upward. Francesca broke the surface, choking and sputtering as she was held firmly against a solid chest. "I've got you now," a deep voice assured her as she gulped precious air. Blinking water from her eyes, Francesca found herself looking into the weathered face of a man perhaps 5 years her senior. His eyes were the clear blue of a summer sky, startling against his sun-darkened skin. With seemingly effortless strength, he guided his horse toward the riverbank, maintaining his hold on Francesca. When they reached shallow water, he dismounted and lifted her from the saddle with gentle hands. "Can you stand, miss?" he asked, still supporting most of her weight. Francesca's legs trembled beneath her sodden skirts. "I believe so," she managed, though she made no move to step away from his steadying presence. "Name's Preston Vaughn," he said, studying her face with concern. "Most folks call me Prees." "Francesca Wells," she replied through chattering teeth. "I am in your debt, Mr. Vaughn." A smile creased the corners of his eyes. "Let's get you someplace warm before we discuss any debts." He removed his oilskin coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "My cabin's not far. We can get you dried off, and I'll take you back to town once this storm passes." Under normal circumstances, Francesca would have refused such an offer from a stranger, a man, no less. But these were hardly normal circumstances, and the storm was intensifying. She nodded her agreement, and Preston led his horse along a narrow trail, keeping one hand at Francesca's elbow to steady her. The cabin appeared between the trees, a sturdy structure built of rough-hewn logs with a small covered porch. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, suggesting a fire already burning inside. "You're fortunate," Preston said as he ushered her through the door. "I don't usually come this way. Been working cattle up north and was just riding back to the ranch." The cabin's interior was simple but neat, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A wooden table and chairs occupied the center of the room, while a curtained alcove presumably concealed a sleeping area. "Stay by the fire," Preston instructed, adding several logs to the flames. "I'll find you something dry to wear." He disappeared behind the curtain, returning moments later with a flannel shirt and woolen trousers. "They'll be too large, but they're clean and dry." Francesca hesitated, clutching the borrowed coat tighter. Preston seemed to understand her discomfort. "I'll wait outside," he assured her. "Take your time." Once alone, Francesca peeled off her sodden clothing, wringing out what water she could before hanging the garments on the chairs near the fire. Preston's clothes engulfed her small frame, but the warmth they provided was immediate and welcome. She rolled up the sleeves and pant legs, cinched the trousers with a piece of rope she found hanging near the door, and called out that it was safe to return. Preston entered carrying an armload of firewood, his own clothes damp from the rain. He nodded approvingly at the sight of her. "Better." "Much," Francesca admitted. "I cannot thank you enough for your assistance, had you not been passing by." "But I was," he interrupted gently. "No need to dwell on what might have happened." He busied himself preparing coffee, his movements efficient and practiced. Francesca took the opportunity to study her rescuer more thoroughly. Preston Vaughn was tall and broad-shouldered, his body lean and muscular beneath simple clothes that spoke of practical needs rather than fashion. His dark hair curled slightly at the collar, still damp from the river, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a strong jaw. "Sugar?" he asked, catching her observation. Francesca felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Yes, please." He handed her a steaming mug, then sat across from her at the table. "What brings a city girl to the Comstock?" he asked, his directness softened by genuine curiosity. "How do you know I'm from a city?" Francesca countered, wrapping her fingers around the warm mug. Preston's mouth quirked upward. "Your hands, for one, no calluses. And your speech, you've had education. Boston, if I had to guess." "You have a good ear," Francesca admitted, surprised. "I came to teach at the school in Virginia City." "Ah, the new school teacher. The mayor mentioned you were arriving." Preston nodded. "It's good work teaching the youngsters. Some of these mining families put great stock in education." And what of you, Mr. Vaughn? What do you do when you're not rescuing drowning women from rivers? His chuckle was low and pleasant. I run cattle on a spread about 10 miles south of here. Nothing fancy, but it's mine, free and clear. They continued talking as the storm raged outside, discovering shared interests in literature and music. Preston revealed he had attended 2 years of college in California before returning to Nevada when his father fell ill. Francesca spoke of her family's financial collapse and her determination to forge an independent life. "It takes courage to leave everything familiar behind," Preston observed, refilling their coffee cups. "Or desperation," Francesca countered. "Sometimes circumstances make the decision for you." Even so, many would have sought the protection of marriage rather than venturing alone into unknown territory. Francesca's expression clouded. "I had such an offer. The son of my father's former business partner proposed a merger of sorts, his family's continued financial stability in exchange for a suitable wife. I declined." "Good for you," Preston said with unexpected vehemence. Then, more softly, "A woman like you deserves better than to be bartered like cattle." Their conversation flowed easily through the afternoon and into evening. By the time the rain stopped, Francesca's clothes had dried, though they remained wrinkled and stained from the river. "I should return to town," she said reluctantly. "Mrs. Hannigan will be concerned about my absence." Preston nodded. "I'll saddle Monarch. We can make Virginia City before full dark." The ride back to town was surprisingly comfortable. Preston seated Francesca in front of him in the saddle, one strong arm around her waist to ensure her safety. The evening air was cool and fresh after the storm, carrying the scent of wet sage and pine. As they approached the outskirts of Virginia City, Francesca felt a curious reluctance to return to her orderly life at the boarding house. Something about Preston Vaughn's quiet confidence and unexpected depth had touched her in ways she hadn't anticipated. "Will you come into town often?" she asked as they neared C Street. Preston considered before answering. "I haven't had much reason to, beyond supplies and occasional business. Perhaps that will change." He delivered her to the boarding house door, dismounting to help her down from the saddle. For a moment they stood close, neither moving away. "Thank you again for saving my life," Francesca said softly. "It was my pleasure, Miss Wells." His eyes held hers. "Though I'd prefer our next meeting involve less danger." "As would I, Mr. Vaughn." Mrs. Hannigan opened the door before anything more could be said, exclaiming over Francesca's disheveled appearance and expressing effusive gratitude to Preston for his timely rescue. By the time the explanations were complete, the moment had passed, and Preston took his leave with a respectful tip of his hat. Francesca watched him ride away, knowing with sudden certainty that her life in Virginia City had just become infinitely more interesting. The following morning, a package arrived for Francesca, her journal which she'd lost during her fall into the river. A note accompanied it. "Found this downstream. The pages are water damaged, but perhaps not beyond saving. PV." That simple gesture marked the beginning. 2 days later, Preston appeared at the schoolhouse as Francesca was arranging desks and organizing teaching materials. He carried a small crate of apples for the teacher and her students, but lingered long after delivering them, helping her move the heavier furniture and hanging a large map of the United States on the wall. When school commenced the following week, Preston made himself scarce, aware that the new teacher needed to establish her authority without distractions. But on Friday afternoon, as classes dismissed, he was waiting outside with Monarch, offering to show Francesca some of the safer trails around Virginia City. These rides became a weekly tradition, each one venturing slightly farther from town. Preston proved to be an excellent guide, sharing the history of the region and pointing out landmarks visible from the higher elevations. Francesca found herself looking forward to Fridays with almost childish enthusiasm, counting the days between their outings. During one such ride in early October, they stopped at a high overlook with a breathtaking view of the valley. "This land gets into your blood," Preston said, dismounting and helping Francesca down from her borrowed mare. "I've been to San Francisco, seen the ocean and all its wonders. Beautiful, yes, but it never felt like home the way this does." Francesca understood. Despite her initial misgivings, she had grown to love the rugged landscape with its dramatic mountains and vast open spaces. Even Virginia City, with its noise and dust and rough edges, had become dear to her. "My mother writes weekly, imploring me to return east before winter," she confessed. "She fears I'll perish from exposure to the elements or savage attacks." Preston laughed. "And what do you tell her?" "That I'm quite content where I am, thank you very much." Francesca smiled. "I don't mention certain adventures involving rivers, of course." "Wise decision." He handed her a canteen of water. "Speaking of winter, it comes early to these mountains. We should make the most of these fair days while they last." The warning proved prophetic. Just a week later, the first snow dusted the higher elevations, and their rides were necessarily curtailed. Preston still made regular appearances in town, often timing his visits to coincide with the end of the school day so he might walk Francesca back to the boarding house. These walks became precious to Francesca, a chance to share the triumphs and frustrations of teaching children of widely varying ages and backgrounds. Preston proved to be an excellent listener, offering practical suggestions when asked, but mostly providing the encouragement she sometimes desperately needed. Young Tommy Billings actually completed an entire arithmetic lesson today without a single error. She reported one particularly cold November afternoon. "I was beginning to fear he would never grasp long division." "The boy needed the right teacher," Preston replied, his breath forming clouds in the frosty air. "Someone who wouldn't give up on him." His words warmed Francesca more than her woolen coat. "I hope you're right. There's so much potential in these children, if only they're given proper guidance and opportunity." "Just like their teacher," Preston said softly, taking her gloved hand in his. "You've flourished here, Francesca. When you first arrived, you seemed not fragile exactly, but uncertain. Now look at you striding through town like you've always belonged." It was true, Francesca realized. The past months had changed her in ways she hadn't fully recognized. She stood straighter, spoke with more confidence, laughed more freely. Part of it was the satisfaction of meaningful work, but much of the credit belonged to the man walking beside her, whose steady support had helped her find her footing in this new world. As they neared the boarding house, Preston slowed his pace. "There's to be a Christmas social at the Opera House," he said, a hint of hesitation in his voice. "Would you do me the honor of attending as my guest?" Francesca's heart leaped. Though they had spent considerable time together over the past months, neither had explicitly acknowledged the growing connection between them. This invitation felt significant, a step beyond their comfortable friendship. "I would be delighted," she replied, unable to suppress her smile. The Virginia City Opera House was transformed for the Christmas social. Evergreen boughs and red ribbons adorning the walls while dozens of candles cast a warm glow over the proceedings. A small orchestra played holiday tunes and dancing pieces, and tables laden with food and punch lined one side of the large room. Francesca had spent hours preparing for the evening, pressing her best dress, a deep green silk that she had carefully preserved from her Boston days, and arranging her hair in an elegant style. Mrs. Hannigan had loaned her a pair of pearl earrings to complete the ensemble, declaring that Francesca would be the belle of the ball, sure as shooting. Preston arrived at the boarding house precisely on time, looking so handsome in his formal suit that Francesca momentarily lost her composure. His dark hair was neatly combed, his beard trimmed close, and his eyes widened appreciatively at the sight of her. "Miss Wells," he said, offering his arm, "you are a vision." The social proved to be everything Francesca had hoped for and more. She had met many of the townspeople through her teaching position, but this was her first opportunity to interact with them in a purely social setting. Preston remained attentive throughout the evening, introducing her to ranchers from outlying properties and ensuring her punch glass never emptied. When he led her onto the dance floor for a waltz, Francesca felt as though they were floating. Preston moved with surprising grace for a man who spent most of his days in the saddle, guiding her through the steps with confident ease. "You dance beautifully," she observed as they circled the floor. "My mother insisted," he replied with a self-deprecating smile. "Said no son of hers would stomp around like a bear with a thorn in its paw. A wise woman, your mother. She would have liked you." A shadow crossed Preston's face. "She passed 3 years ago. Pneumonia." Francesca squeezed his hand gently. "I'm sorry. It must be difficult managing the ranch alone since then." "It is," he acknowledged, "but I've been thinking lately that perhaps it doesn't have to remain that way indefinitely." Before Francesca could respond to this tantalizing statement, the music ended, and they were separated by well-wishers and conversation. The moment passed, but Francesca carried his words with her through the remainder of the evening, wondering at their meaning and hoping she hadn't misinterpreted. As Christmas approached, heavy snows blanketed the mountains, making travel between the ranch and Virginia City increasingly difficult. Preston managed to visit twice more before the holiday, bringing Francesca a beautifully carved wooden box for her desk, "to keep special treasures," he explained, and receiving from her a hand-knitted scarf in rich blue wool that matched his eyes. "To keep you warm on the long rides," she said, watching with pleasure as he immediately wound it around his neck. "It's perfect," he assured her, touching the soft material reverently. "Though I find myself growing warmer whenever you're near, scarf or no scarf." The bold statement, so unlike Preston's usual careful speech, brought color to Francesca's cheeks. "Mr. Vaughn, you'll make me blush." "You already are," he pointed out, his expression tender. "And I believe, after all we've shared, you might call me Preston." "Preston," she repeated softly, liking the feel of his name on her lips. "Then you must call me Francesca." "Francesca," he said, his voice caressing each syllable. "A beautiful name for a beautiful woman." Heavy snowfall kept them apart through Christmas and into the new year. Francesca threw herself into preparations for the spring term, developing new lessons and reading extensively from the small collection of books available in Virginia City. She exchanged letters with Preston when possible, the written words becoming a lifeline during the long winter separation. In early February, an unexpected thaw opened the roads briefly. Preston appeared at the schoolhouse door moments after the last student departed, his face lighting up at the sight of Francesca. "I've missed you," he said simply, crossing the room in long strides to take her hands in his. "And I you," Francesca admitted, suddenly shy in his presence after so many weeks apart. "I've been thinking," Preston began, then hesitated. "That is, I've had a great deal of time to consider certain matters while snowbound at the ranch." Francesca's heart quickened. "Oh. What matters would those be?" "Matters of the heart," he replied, his gaze steady. "Francesca, I know we've only known each other a short time in the grand scheme of things, but I feel as though I've been waiting for you all my life without realizing it." He released one of her hands to reach into his coat pocket, withdrawing a small box. "This belonged to my mother," he said, opening it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a modestly sized diamond. "I would be honored if you would consider wearing it." Francesca stared at the ring, then at Preston's earnest face. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm asking if you might consider becoming my wife," he confirmed, his voice catching slightly. "I love you, Francesca Wells. I think I have since I pulled you from that river and heard your voice for the first time." Tears welled in Francesca's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "Yes, Preston. Yes, I will marry you." The joy that transformed his face was answer enough, but Preston sealed the promise with a kiss, their first, that left Francesca breathless, and certain she had made the right decision. They agreed to marry in the spring, after the worst of the winter weather had passed. Francesca would complete the school term, fulfilling her commitment to the children and the town that had welcomed her. In June, she would move to Preston's ranch, which he had already begun expanding in anticipation of their shared future. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Virginia City. Most responses were enthusiastic, with many expressing that they had seen the match coming since Preston's dramatic rescue the previous summer. A few raised eyebrows at the relative brevity of their courtship, but even the most gossipy tongues could find no real fault with the pairing of the respectable schoolteacher and the hardworking rancher. The following weeks passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Francesca wrote to her mother with the news, receiving a cautiously optimistic reply and a promise to send a proper wedding gift. Preston made arrangements for additional furnishings to be delivered to the ranch house, including a new bed and a writing desk where Francesca could continue her correspondence and lesson planning. March brought another thaw, allowing more frequent visits. Preston often arrived bearing small gifts: a book of poetry, a jar of honey from a neighboring farm, wildflowers that had emerged in sheltered spots. Each offering reflected his growing understanding of Francesca's tastes and preferences, cementing her certainty that they were well matched despite their different backgrounds. "Have you considered what you'll do after we're married?" Preston asked one Sunday afternoon as they walked along Virginia City's boardwalk. "About teaching, I mean." Francesca had indeed given the matter considerable thought. "I would like to continue in some capacity," she admitted. "Perhaps not in the town school given the distance, but there are children near the ranch who might benefit from instruction." Preston nodded thoughtfully. "The Hendersons have 4 youngsters, and the Millers another 3, several other families within riding distance, too. We could set up a small schoolroom at the ranch if you'd like." His easy acceptance of her desire to continue teaching confirmed what Francesca already knew, that Preston saw her as a partner in their life together, not merely a helpmate or decoration for his home. The realization deepened her love for him and her anticipation of their shared future. April arrived with renewed snowfall that briefly threatened their plans, but by May, the roads were clear enough for regular travel. Preston came to Virginia City each weekend, sometimes staying overnight at the International Hotel to maximize their time together. They explored the town hand in hand, making plans and sharing dreams for their life together. One such Saturday, they were walking past the assay office when a commotion erupted from a nearby saloon. Shouts and the sound of breaking glass preceded the appearance of 2 men locked in a violent struggle that spilled onto the street. Preston immediately positioned himself between Francesca and the disturbance, but the fighting men paid them no heed, focused entirely on inflicting damage upon each other. One man, clearly intoxicated, drew a pistol from his belt. The other, seeing the weapon, lunged forward in an attempt to disarm his opponent. The gun discharged with a deafening crack. Both combatants froze, then slowly separated, staring at each other in shock. For a moment, it seemed neither had been hit. Then the unarmed man looked down at his chest, where a dark stain was rapidly spreading across his shirt. "You shot me," he said incredulously, before crumpling to the ground. The scene dissolved into chaos. Bystanders rushed forward to restrain the shooter, while others knelt beside the wounded man. The sheriff emerged from his office, barking orders and clearing space. Preston guided Francesca away from the scene, his expression grim. "Let's get you back to the boarding house." "Will that man die?" Francesca asked, trembling slightly from the sudden violence. "I don't know," Preston admitted. "Doc Saunders is good, but gut shots are tricky." The incident cast a pall over their weekend, reminding Francesca of the frontier's harsher realities. While Virginia City had become more civilized since its early boomtown days, it still harbored dangerous elements, a fact she had somewhat forgotten in her happiness. "Does it happen often?" she asked that evening as they sat in the boarding house parlor, the only private space available to them. "Such violence?" Preston considered the question carefully. "Less than it used to, more than it should. Most folks around here are decent people just trying to make a living, but whiskey and gambling and old grudges sometimes lead to trouble." "At the ranch, it's different," he assured her, understanding her unspoken concern. "Quieter, safer. Our nearest neighbors are the Hendersons, and old Tom hasn't fired a gun in anger since the war." Francesca nodded, reassured by his words and the steady strength of his presence. Whatever challenges their life together might bring, they would face them as one. The wounded man survived, much to everyone's surprise, and the incident faded into the background as wedding preparations intensified. Francesca completed the school term with bittersweet emotions, proud of her students' progress, but sad to leave them. The town held a small celebration in her honor, presenting her with a handcrafted quilt and numerous well wishes for her marriage. June dawned bright and clear, with wildflowers carpeting the mountainsides and the scent of pine carried on gentle breezes. Francesca woke in her boarding house room, heart racing with anticipation. Today, she would marry Preston Vaughn and begin their life together. Mrs. Hannigan and several other women from town helped her prepare, dressing her hair with sprigs of lavender and baby's breath, and assisting with the buttons of her wedding gown, a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk with delicate lace trim, ordered from a catalog and altered to fit her slender frame. "You look absolutely beautiful," Mrs. Hannigan declared, blinking back tears. "That cowboy of yours won't know what hit him." The wedding took place in Virginia City's small church, its pews filled with townspeople who had come to regard Francesca as one of their own. Preston waited at the altar, resplendent in a new suit, his face a mixture of nervousness and joy. When Francesca appeared at the back of the church, his expression transformed into one of such pure adoration that her steps faltered briefly. They spoke their vows clearly and sincerely, promising to love and cherish each other through all of life's joys and hardships. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Preston's kiss was gentle, but conveyed a depth of emotion that left no doubt of his feelings. A reception followed at the International Hotel, with food and dancing lasting well into the evening. As darkness fell, Preston led Francesca to a waiting carriage decorated with ribbons and flowers. "Ready to see your new home, Mrs. Vaughn?" he asked, helping her into the vehicle. "More than ready," she assured him, still marveling at her new name and status. The journey to the ranch took just over an hour, the carriage moving at a steady pace along roads illuminated by a nearly full moon. Preston pointed out landmarks as they traveled, building Francesca's mental map of the territory that would now be her home. The ranch house appeared ahead, windows glowing with welcoming light. Preston had arranged for his foreman and the man's wife to prepare the house for their arrival. And as the carriage drew closer, Francesca could see that lanterns had been hung from the porch eaves, creating a magical effect against the night sky. "It's beautiful," she breathed as Preston helped her down from the carriage. "Welcome home," he said, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. The interior was warm and inviting, far more comfortable than Francesca had imagined from Preston's modest descriptions. The main room featured a large stone fireplace, comfortable seating, and bookshelves already partially filled with volumes. A dining area adjoined a well-equipped kitchen, while a hallway led to several bedrooms and Preston's study. "This is wonderful," Francesca exclaimed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "You never said the house was so spacious." Preston smiled sheepishly. "I may have been making some improvements since we became engaged, and there's room to expand as needed." His meaning was clear, and Francesca blushed at the implication. Children had been part of their discussions about the future, though neither had specified a timeline. Now, standing in what would be their family home, the possibility seemed more immediate and tangible. Preston moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Are you happy, Francesca?" "Truly, truly," she confirmed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "I never imagined finding such happiness, especially not after coming west in such desperate circumstances. You've given me more than I dared hope for." "You've done the same for me," he murmured against her hair. "I was content enough before, but now I understand the difference between contentment and joy." That night, as they came together as husband and wife for the first time, Francesca discovered new depths to their connection. Preston's tenderness and patience made the unfamiliar intimate, and any initial discomfort quickly gave way to pleasure and wonder at this final joining of their lives. Summer passed in a golden haze as Francesca learned the rhythms of ranch life. Preston was an attentive husband, balancing his work responsibilities with time devoted solely to her. He taught her to ride with greater confidence, guided her through the surrounding countryside, and introduced her to the basics of ranch operations without ever suggesting she must conform to any particular role or expectation. For her part, Francesca transformed the house into a true home, adding touches that reflected both their tastes. She planted a kitchen garden, organized the books by subject and author, and created a teaching space in one of the unused bedrooms, complete with chalkboard and desks salvaged from Virginia City's school attic. By August, she had 6 regular pupils, the Henderson and Miller children, who arrived by wagon 3 days each week for lessons in reading, writing, arithmetic, and history. Preston often stopped by during these sessions, listening from the doorway with evident pride as Francesca guided her students through their lessons. "You're a natural teacher," he observed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Those children adore you," Francesca smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "Teaching is a joy when the students are eager to learn, and it gives structure to my days while you're working with the cattle." Preston's arm tightened around her. "Are you certain you're not too lonely out here? We could make more regular trips to town if you're missing the society." "Not at all," she assured him. "I have my students, occasional visits with their mothers, and letters from friends, and every evening I have you." She turned to face him more directly. "This life suits me far better than I could have imagined. I wouldn't trade it for all the tea parties in Boston." September brought the cattle roundup, with Preston working from dawn until dusk gathering the herd and preparing for market. Francesca found herself busy as well, cooking for the ranch hands and helping where she could while maintaining her small school. The work was exhausting but satisfying, and she fell into bed each night with a profound sense of accomplishment. When the cattle drive departed for the railhead in Reno, Preston left his foreman in charge, unwilling to be separated from Francesca for the weeks the journey would require. This decision raised a few eyebrows among the older hands, but none questioned. It was clear to anyone with eyes that Preston Vaughn was deeply in love with his new wife. "The ranch managed without me before we met," he explained when Francesca expressed concern about his choice. "It can certainly do so now, especially with Thompson overseeing things. He's been working cattle longer than I've been alive." October arrived with crisp mornings and golden afternoons. Francesca noticed subtle changes in herself, a tendency to tire more easily, a strange new sensitivity to certain smells, a fullness in her breasts that hadn't been there before. By the middle of the month, she was certain. She chose a Sunday morning to share the news, preparing Preston's favorite breakfast and serving it with nervous anticipation. "Is something wrong?" he asked, noticing her distraction as she pushed food around her plate without eating. Francesca took a deep breath. "Not wrong, just unexpected." Or perhaps not unexpected, but sooner than anticipated. Preston set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "Francesca, what is it?" "I believe," she said carefully, "that we will be welcoming a new member to our household come spring." For a moment, Preston looked confused. Then understanding dawned, his expression shifting from surprise to wonder to unbridled joy. He rose from his chair and came around the table, kneeling beside her. "A baby?" he asked, placing one large hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." Francesca nodded, tears of happiness welling in her eyes. "Yes, our baby." Preston gathered her into his arms, holding her as though she were made of the finest porcelain. "I love you," he whispered fiercely. "Both of you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the autumn months. Francesca continued teaching, though she reduced the schedule to 2 days weekly as her energy waned. Preston hovered attentively, ensuring she rested often and ate well, reading every available book on childbirth and infant care with the same dedication he applied to ranch management. Winter arrived with heavy snow that isolated the ranch for days at a time, but their preparations had been thorough. The root cellar was well stocked, the woodpile substantial, and Preston had arranged for Doc Saunders to stay with them during the latter part of Francesca's confinement, not trusting weather conditions to allow for a timely summons when the baby decided to make its appearance. Christmas was a quiet, intimate celebration, with Preston presenting Francesca with a beautifully crafted cradle he had secretly commissioned from a carpenter in Virginia City. "For our little one," he said, running his hand lovingly over the smooth wooden rails. Francesca's gift to him was a hand-embroidered blanket for the baby, worked on during long winter afternoons. "Something from both of us," she explained as Preston examined the delicate stitching with obvious emotion. January brought renewed snowfall and increasing discomfort for Francesca as the baby grew. Preston took over many of her household duties, proving surprisingly adept at cooking and cleaning despite his initial clumsiness. His willingness to help without complaint only deepened Francesca's appreciation for the man she had married. In February, Doc Saunders arrived as planned, bringing his medical supplies and a wealth of experience delivering babies under frontier conditions. He examined Francesca carefully, declaring her healthy and the pregnancy progressing normally. "First babies often take their time," he advised, settling into the guest room that had been prepared for him. "But everything appears to be in order." March arrived with the first hints of spring, crocuses pushing through patches of melting snow and birds returning to nest in the eaves of the barn. Francesca felt increasingly restless, her body heavy and unwieldy as she entered the final weeks of waiting. The pains began on a clear morning as Preston was checking on a new calf in the barn. Francesca was hanging freshly washed baby clothes near the stove when the first contraction seized her, strong enough to make her gasp and clutch the back of a chair for support. Doc Saunders, reading by the fire, looked up sharply at the sound. "Is it time?" he asked, already rising to his feet. "I believe so," Francesca managed as the pain subsided. "Should someone fetch Preston?" "Let's get you settled first," the doctor suggested, guiding her toward the bedroom. "These things usually take hours. There's plenty of time to call him in." But this baby, having waited patiently through the long winter, seemed determined to arrive with surprising speed. By the time Preston burst through the door, alerted by one of the ranch hands, Francesca was deep in labor, her face flushed with exertion. "You're doing beautifully," Doc Saunders assured her as Preston took his place at her side, gripping her hand and murmuring words of encouragement. Not much longer now. True to his prediction, their daughter entered the world less than an hour later, announcing her arrival with a lusty cry that brought tears to both parents' eyes. She was perfect tiny fingers and toes, a dusting of dark hair like Preston's, and eyes that, when briefly opened, hinted at Francesca's clear green. "She's magnificent," Preston whispered, cradling the swaddled infant with careful hands. "Just like her mother." They named her Rose Alina after Preston's mother. Rose for the wild roses that had been blooming when Francesca first fell into the river, and their lives became inexorably intertwined. Doc Saunders pronounced both mother and child healthy, promising to remain a few more days to ensure all continued well before making the journey back to Virginia City. Spring bloomed fully around them as they adjusted to life with an infant. Ellie, as they called her, proved to be a good-natured baby, sleeping for reasonable stretches and regarding the world with curious eyes that increasingly revealed their resemblance to Francesca's. By summer, they had established new routines that accommodated both the baby's needs and the demands of the ranch. Francesca resumed teaching on a limited basis, with Ellie sleeping in a cradle nearby or sometimes nestled in a sling against her chest. Preston adapted his work schedule to spend more time near the house, unwilling to miss any of his daughter's developments. On the anniversary of the day Preston had pulled Francesca from the river, they rode together to that same spot, now safe and familiar, with Ellie secured in a special carrier Preston had designed for horseback travel. "It's hard to believe it's been 2 years, Francesca said as they dismounted near the riverbank, now placid and gentle in the summer heat. "So much has changed." Preston lifted Ellie from her carrier, holding her so she could see the sparkling water. "That day when I saw you fall in, I was terrified," he admitted. "I didn't even think, just rode straight into the current after you." "My hero," Francesca teased gently, though her eyes reflected sincere gratitude. "No," Preston said seriously, "you're the brave one. You left everything familiar to forge a new life. You took a chance on a rough cowboy who probably seemed worlds away from the kind of gentleman you knew in Boston." "The best decision I ever made," Francesca assured him, stepping close to embrace both husband and daughter. "I may have fallen into that river, but in doing so, I fell into exactly the life I was meant to have." Preston's kiss was tender, conveying all the love and commitment that had grown between them. "When I pulled you from the water and said I've got you now, I had no idea how true those words would become. But I meant them then, and I mean them even more today. I've got you, Francesca, you and Ellie and whatever other children we might be blessed with. Always. The sun warmed them as they spread a blanket on a grassy patch near the river, allowing Ellie to practice her newly mastered crawling while they shared a picnic lunch. The baby's delighted giggles mingled with the sound of flowing water and birdsong, creating a symphony that celebrated the life they had built together, a life that had begun with a desperate plunge, and a rescue that saved far more than just Francesca's physical form. As the afternoon light turned golden, they gathered their belongings and prepared for the ride home. Francesca cast one last glance at the river that had changed her destiny. "Thank you," she whispered to the flowing waters, before turning toward the future that awaited them, a future built on love that had proven as deep and enduring as the current itself.